There are certain teams that beyond question get more attention than others. That's just the way it is. And as a result, sometimes there are those certain teams that get more criticism than others because of who they are, what they represent, and ultimately what they do. And there's no doubt about it, the Dallas Cowboys definitely fit into that category. Now, I know some of you out there that might be Cowboys fans think that sometimes I'm too hard on the organization, I don't give them enough credit. Here's the bottom line. And this again coming from a Bears fan's perspective, my team hasn't won a world championship in 28 years. The Dallas Cowboys have not won a world championship in 18 years now. Just soak that in for a second. 18 years. The Dallas Cowboys, to me, easily have to be the most talked about mediocre-ass football team in the history of North American professional sports. And I don't understand why certain Cowboy fans, year in and year out, seem to have this belief that their organization or their team is being well run and is close to being a championship contender when it couldn't be further from the truth. Now, of course, it all starts at the top with Jerry Jones. And the bottom line is the Cowboys will not be relevant championship contenders until Jerry Jones steps aside from actually running the day-to-day football operations and finds real football people to run his front office, to run his drafts, etc. Because what are the results of Jerry Jones running the show from a football standpoint? Consistently mediocre over the past 18 years. That's just the way it is. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I don't think anybody would deny it. Continuously putting the organization in a bad way, salary cap wise, restricting what they can do in the offseason, restricting sometimes what they do in the draft, which you saw play out here in the 2014 NFL draft. And you have a team that every once in a while has a good draft, but more often than not misses the mark. And just an overall poor philosophy in terms of how the NFL draft works. You've got a Dallas Cowboys team that, frankly, is trying to win now without the plan in place to be able to win now, without the talent in place to be able to win now. Actually, frankly, an organization that for far too long has been putting off that big rebuilding project that they truly need to undergo. And when you look at the 2014 NFL draft for the Dallas Cowboys, to me it represents so many things that epitomize what Jerry Jones has done running the show over the past decade and a half plus. It really, truly does. You can look at the results down below, and it just looks like a Dallas Cowboys draft. And no, that's not necessarily a good thing. Now, one of the most interesting subplots heading into day one of the 2014 NFL draft was not only where was Johnny Manziel going to end up, but if he dropped to pick number 16, would the Dallas Cowboys pull the trigger? Would Jerry Jones pull the trigger and take Johnny Manziel and make him the heir apparent to Tony Romo and potentially find a future star quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys? At the end of the day, Jerry Jones and his staff, his team, I guess, decided against it. And that'll ultimately be the legacy of this draft. There's no question about it. If Johnny Manziel becomes a franchise NFL quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, Jerry Jones will look like a clown. Jerry Jones will look like an idiot. I don't care if their first-round pick becomes a 10-year Pro Bowler. You can be a 10-year Pro Bowler at another position, but you can't pass up on franchise quarterbacks. And for Jerry Jones to pass on Johnny Manziel, I will say if nothing else, takes balls. Maybe takes some stupidity as well. But also, again, it's because of the stupidity of what Jerry Jones has done over the years from a salary cap standpoint and paying guys way too much money and mismanaging the cap so poorly that he had so much money plunked into a quarterback that's close to 35 years of age with back issues now that consistently has failed to come through in clutch situations when the team needs it in a Tony Romo, that maybe he was handicapped and he felt he had no choice but to go in another place because he's given so much money to Romo. He couldn't sit there and take the guy that he said himself was the best player on his board at pick number 16. And even before the draft, Jerry Jones was talking about, and there were rumors about Jerry Jones really wants Manziel to be there at number 16, not necessarily so he could take him, but so that way he could trade out of the pick. Manziel drops to 16 and he does neither. He doesn't take him and he doesn't trade out of the pick. He sits put. Now, in terms of the best pick the Cowboys had, I will still go with Zack Martin. I will say as much as I thought maybe they should have taken Manziel, or as much as they probably should have addressed defense here all throughout the draft, including round number 1, I cannot deny that Offensive line was a big need for the Dallas Cowboys heading into this offseason. You've got a stud left tackle in Tyron Smith, and then you've got your first-round pick, Travis Frederick, at center, who you took last year instead of addressing that new defensive scheme, that cover two that you were going to run because Jerry Jones, again, is a moron. But you've got two pillars of an offensive line. But the interior of the line as a whole is relatively weak. The right tackle play is questionable, to say the very least. And Zack Martin is an immediate upgrade to that offensive line and a day one contributor. And you got a quarterback now in Tony Romo with back injuries and other injury concerns. You need to protect him better. You need to open up more consistent holes in the running game and provide him better pass protection. And whether Zack Martin ends up playing guard or he plays right tackle at the NFL level, he definitely provides a day one instant upgrade. And again, in theory, did fill a relatively big need for the Dallas Cowboys. In terms of the best value pick they got, I'll go maybe all the way to round number 7 in Terrance Mitchell or Ahmad Dixon, the safety from Baylor, or Mitchell, the cornerback from Oregon. These are guys with some of those skill sets that you look for out of an NFL secondary player, but they drop for different reasons. One or two of those guys could end up being productive players for the Cowboys, and to get him in round 7 was actually pretty good value. A guy that maybe could surprise a little bit. I'm not the highest on him, but maybe a guy like a Devin from Pittsburgh. You've got a Des Bryant, you've got a Terrance Williams. Now you bring in a Devin who's a little bit of a different, more possession type of wide receiver, and he could be a good complement that allows him to line up Bryant some out of the slot, maybe Terrance Williams in the slot more. A guy like a Devin playing with Tony Romo, the one thing that Cowboys offense can do is put up a lot of yards, especially through the air. A guy like Devin could come in and make a solid contribution early on. But for me, as it so often comes with the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys drafts, there's a lot of second guessing for me. Passing on Johnny Manziel or even Teddy Bridgewater to me would be one glaring second guess, because you really think Tony Romo is a championship level quarterback, Jerry Jones? You really think you're in a win now mode because Tony Romo is your quarterback? Tony Romo is a great stat sheet filler. And you may argue he is perhaps a franchise quarterback, but he will never be an elite quarterback. And from everything he's ever shown and indicated, he will never be that big-time quarterback that can make big-time plays in the clutch when you truly, really need them. And his history, again, clearly proves that out. So passing on a Manziel or a Bridgewater here, to me, seems very ridiculous. What's even more ridiculous to me is the fact that while I like Zack Martin as a prospect, and he definitely fills a need for the Cowboys, there's no question about that, they took either a left guard, a right guard, or a right tackle with the 16th overall pick. Only Jerry Jones and a couple of other select idiots would think that's a good thing and be giving themselves high fives over this. It'd be different if you were drafting Zack Martin number 16 and you assumed that he was going to be a franchise left tackle. But he's not going to be that franchise left tackle because you already got Smith there. He's your franchise left tackle. And with a team with so many other needs, in particular on the defensive side of the football, why would you devote a first-round pick in a class deep in offensive tackles, in particular right tackles in the middle rounds? Why would you invest the 16th overall selection on a guy like a Zack Martin when guys like Pryor and Clinton Dix, a couple of safeties, were on the board? Why would you do that? And all this talk about them wanting to trade out of that pick, they stayed put. Maybe they could have traded down some and gotten somebody like a D Ford or a Marcus Smith or whatever the case might be. And then I question them trading up for DeMarcus Lawrence. Again, maybe this comes into the stupidity of taking Zack Martin in round number 1 from a philosophical standpoint. They sat there and moved up from 47 to 34, giving up a third-round pick that I felt they desperately needed to help address that defense, to take DeMarcus Lawrence from Boise State, who reminds me a little bit of Shea McClellan. He's about 250 pounds. There's some questions about whether or not he could play defensive end in a 4-3 at the National Football League level. And you traded up to get him? Typical Cowboys. Typical of Jerry Jones. Now you're saying, well, it's easy for you to bitch about what would you have done differently. Well, based off of the way the Cowboys were positioned and things played out, if I'm running the Cowboys, and again, this is just me throwing out a hypothetical scenario based off of situations, based off of draft board scenarios, and based off of organizational needs as well. At pick number 16, I'd either take a Johnny Manziel or a Teddy Bridgewater for the Cowboys, or I'd go to the defensive backfield and get Clinton Dix or Calvin Pryor. Any of those picks, I think, short-term and long-term, were better picks for the Dallas Cowboys than Zack Martin was. In round number 2, you don't need to trade up. Stay at 47. Take a guy like a Trent Murphy from Stanford, or a Coney Ealy from Missouri, or a Scott Crichton from Oregon State. Again, all guys that I think could potentially be better, more productive NFL players than a DeMarcus Lawrence, and all the while you didn't have to move up. You could have stayed put at 47 and gotten any one of those guys. I'm just saying. Or even if you say Murphy was off the board by then, but you still have Ealy and Crichton, guys that fill a huge void in that defense. You look at round number 3, since I wouldn't have traded that second round or that third round pick to move up 13 spots in round 2 to get a questionable 4-3 defensive end like DeMarcus Lawrence. They could have sat there and taken a Terrance Brooks, the safety from Florida State, Will Sutton, the defensive tackle from Arizona State, line him up next to Henry Melton on the inside of that defense. You could have taken a running back. They need running back help. A guy like Jerick McKinnon from Georgia Southern. They could have taken an offensive lineman from like Trey Turner from LSU and still address the offensive line. And then in the 4th round, maybe you look at a guy like a Carl Bradford. Maybe you look at a guy like a Dakota Dozier or a Cameron Fleming. Again, to me, this draft for the Dallas Cowboys just represents how over his head Jerry Jones truly is when it comes to running a draft board, running a war room. Because the priorities are all over the place and they usually come out wrong. And that's just the way it is. My final grade for the Cowboys is a C-. They didn't get Johnny Manziel or Bridgewater. They didn't get a big upgrade at safety. Why give up a 3rd round pick to move up 13 slots to get a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence when there were actually better pass rushers on the board like Murphy or Crichton or Coney Ealy? I don't get that. So it's not only a thing of moving up and giving up an important mid-round pick that they needed unnecessarily. They didn't even get the best pass rusher on the board at that point in time. I heard somebody say that weekend of the draft right afterwards that the Cowboys were having a kick-ass 7th round, and they really dominated round 7. If you're dominating round 7, that means you suck, and that makes you big-time losers. And we've heard this in the past about the Dallas Cowboys. I remember the one year they were trading out of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd round. They're like, we're going to dominate rounds 4 through 7. How'd that work out for the Dallas Cowboys? Again, I'm basing it off of history. And at the end of the day, for a team that claims to want to win now, even though they need to really think about rebuilding, they took a right tackle or a right or left guard at pick number 16. That's what Jerry Jones does. That's what the Dallas Cowboys have done with Jerry Jones running the show over the past 18 years. I gave him a C- because, like I said, I do think Zack Martin will be a solid player at the NFL level. Devin Street might work out well for him. I like a couple of the guys they did take in the 7th round. But in general, this just seems like another typical Dallas Cowboys, Jerry Jones NFL draft failure, from my perspective anyways.